What you heard right there was brand new Metallica from their Death Magnetic CD, and this is a very special Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast, as they all are, but you guessed it, this one is all about the latest Metallica CD. We've got 3 great guests on this episode. This is Shockwave Skull Sessions, episode number 13, by the way. The guests we've got are Joel McIver, author of the great Metallica book and Justice for All. He also just recently wrote a book on Slayer called The Raining Blood of Slayer. I'm sure you're very familiar with Joel's work. He's written several great books on metal. We've had him on the Shockwaves Hard Radio podcast before, and we also had him on episode 2 of the Shockwave Skull Session along with Doug Goodman regarding Slayer. So Joel is always a great guest, a good buddy, and always great to have him on. We also got Bill Irwin, or William Irwin as he is called professionally, also an author. He wrote a great book entitled Metallica And Philosophy, and William is also a philosophy professor, I believe, in the New England area. And speaking of England, Joel McIver, I should mention, is from England, so the guy with the British accent, of course, is Joel. William's Metallica and Philosophy book has a different take and very interesting for any philosophy and or Metallica fans. So it's great to have Professor Irwin here giving his very philosophical insight on the new Metallica record. And our third guest is Ed Rivadavia from AllMusic.com, a great writer. He also works for BMG Sony, big Metallica fan, and we're actually going to have him on the AC/DC podcast, which is going to be coming up within the next couple episodes. That will be a discussion on the AC/DC catalog, including their latest release, Black Ice. Ed will be involved with that episode as well. So we've got a great cast of characters on this episode, and we're going to get right to it. But before we do, I want to remind you guys, we're still running the PV contest. That is the contest where we are giving away a brand new PV Zodiac DE bass guitar. This is the David Ellefson signature guitar. We are giving it away, gentlemen and ladies, but you gotta send in those emails. So what you guys gotta do is go back and listen to Shockwave Skull Sessions episode number 11. The last episode, number 12, was the Get Thrashed episode. I believe we run the contest after the great interview with Rick Ernst and Rat Skates. And on that previous episode, number 11, that was all about the contest. So for those not familiar with how I run the contest, go ahead and listen back to episode number 11, because that will go through the rules. And then, of course, I run the 10 riffs. The person that gets the most correct answers, of course, by November, I believe is going to be around November 11th or so, that is when we're going to close down all bets, and the person who has the most correct answers will be the proud owner of the PV Zodiac DE bass guitar. So once again, guys and gals, go back, listen to those episodes. Email me at shockwaveskullsessions@gmail.com. You could also check out the MySpace page. I'm not very active on the MySpace page, so I do apologize about that. But I do check it every now and again. You could email there at myspace.com/shockwaveskullsessions, or if you do hit me up on my Shockwaves Hard Radio email or MySpace page, I will of course reply to you on that account as well. So we're going to get right into it, man. This is about an hour-long discussion. I suggest you grab yourself a beer or your favorite cocktail or whatever you might like to indulge in, and relax, kick back, and listen to this great discussion about Metallica. This is the Shockwave Skull Sessions. We got a very, very special podcast here. Some very special guests. All the way from the UK, we got my good buddy, Joel McIver. What's up there, Joel?
Good evening, Sir Bob of Nalbandian. How are you?
I am doing okay. You ready for this, man?
I'm really looking forward to this, man. I was just saying, for the benefit of the listeners, I'm the Brit with the kind of the gay accent, you know what I mean? I don't have a macho accent like the Americans on this program. You'll recognize me speaking.
That's right. Of course, Joel, as many people know, we had Joel in the past. We had him on, I believe, the second Skull Sessions, which was a one on Slayer, a great conversation we had
great
with
fun.
Slayer.
Yeah.
With Doug Goodman and Joel. And of course, Joel just released the Slayer book, Bloody Reign of Slayer, the Bloody Reign of Slayer, right?
Yeah, Bob, can you say that in a death metal way? Can you say the bloody reign of Slayer?
The bloody reign of Slayer.
That's it. That's much better, thank you.
It works much better with an American accent, right?
Of course, everything's better in America. We know that. I admit that right from the start.
And of course, Joel also wrote the book Injustice for All, which was a huge
I did. I wrote a book called
you.
Justice for All, The Truth About Metallica in 2004, which has done extremely well, and even Lars Ulrich is familiar with it. He has asked to sign copies of that book all over the world, he told me the other day, which is a nice little ego-stroking moment for me. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. And of course, Joel has interviewed pretty much all the members of Metallica, correct, over the years?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, present and past. Oh, yeah, all those guys. We're like family.
There you go, man. Joel,
No, don't take that literally.
Tree. Cool. And also on the line, we got William Irwin, who we also had before on a Shockwaves Hard Radio podcast regarding his book, Metallica And Philosophy. What's going on there, William?
Hey, thanks for having me back, Bob. Great to talk to you. Great to have a chance to hear Joel as well. He and I have exchanged emails over the months and years, and I'm a big fan of his recent book on Slayer as well as his Metallica books. So great to have a chance to talk together about the new album.
Likewise, yeah, definitely.
Now, William, do you prefer, I know professionally you're William, do you prefer to be called Bill, or should we call you Professor?
Yeah, no.
How about Professor Irwin?
Call me Bill, please.
We will call you Bill. For those that don't know, Bill is a professor of philosophy. And,
strange as that might sound, yeah.
Yes, which is pretty amazing. We got actually a professor on the Skull Sessions, so very educational.
Doctor of Metal, yeah.
The book you put out was Metallica and Philosophy, and you've actually done a series of these philosophy books. You said you were coming out with one, The Terminator and Philosophy.
Yeah. We try to pick up whatever's of interest in popular culture. So it started with a book on Seinfeld and philosophy, Simpsons and philosophy, Matrix and philosophy. We've had one come out on Batman, The Watchmen, and Terminator's in the works. So that's the thing, taking a look at popular culture and looking at the big ideas that are at work there, and trying to teach people a little something along the way.
But don't be fooled. Don't think that he does not know about Metallica. Reading his Metallica and Philosophy book, not only you, Bill, but all the writers involved, I was really impressed with their knowledge about the band.
It's no joke, yeah. No, I'm a big Metallica fan from back 1984, 1985, right up to the present day, and that's the key with all these books. We want to work with people who are real fans because we're writing them for fans. So it might sound like a strange thing getting philosophy professors talking about popular culture, but we're big fans of Metallica and the other stuff that we write about, and just trying to bring some philosophy along for the ride.
How cool is that to have Bill Irwin as your teacher, talking about Metallica in the classroom?
Well, it depends on who you ask.
And also, our third guest, we got Ed Rivadavia. What's going on there, Ed?
Hey, Bob, how you doing? Glad to be back on the Skull Sessions.
We just had Ed on the great conversation about AC/DC with Ed and John Bush. I don't know if we're going to actually get this on before the AC/DC one. Ed works for it's allmusic.com, allmusicguide.com.
Allmusic.com. It's pretty much the database for most all the websites you'll find on the web. They all draw from that source. So it's a great opportunity to write for them because you get to review your favorite records, and it goes out pretty much all over the web.
All right, and Ed also works at BMG Sony out of New York. So a lot of experience from Ed, and you're a longtime Metallica fan as well, correct, Ed?
Absolutely. I also got into them probably around 84, 85. Ride the Lightning, and been a fan ever since. So looking forward to talking about them.
Let's get started on this, man. Death Magnetic. Why don't I first get your views on it? I know it's a little bit late. We were going to actually have this discussion about the time the CD was released, or just after, but at least this time we gave you guys time to kind of absorb the record, give it quite a few listens and such. So given that, what's your views on it, Joel? I got to mention, Joel was one of the very few people to preview this record. Is that correct, in England?
That is correct. In the first week of June this year, when no one really had heard anything about the record or knew what it was called, we didn't know any titles. For some reason, Q Prime, Metallica's management, decided to put on a playback session in London. I don't know why they didn't do it in the USA, but for some reason they did it in London for about 12 journalists that were invited. And I was one of them. And we all went to Universal and sat around and listened to 6 songs. The Day That Never Comes was one of them. My Apocalypse was one of them. A few others from the album. And to this day, I don't know why they did it, because if you check the internet, you'll read the whole story. What happened was that, obviously, right after the playback, everybody went and wrote about it on a blog. The Kerrang guys, Metal Hammer, and everybody else. And then Q Prime said, take it down. Take those things down. We don't want it written about. And then a week later, Metallica changed their mind and told the management that they were wrong, and that it was okay for us to write about it. And it was just all this bizarre, completely mismanaged bit of publicity. And to this day, I don't know why they did it. I interviewed Lars the other day for Rhythm magazine, the drummers mag, and I said to him, what was the point of that playback? And he said, look, I just don't know. I can't give you an answer because, well, he doesn't micromanage to that degree. Q Prime did all that stuff. And so yes, the short answer is yes, Bob. I was one of the very few to hear it back in June. And I think you're very wise to say, as you did, that people need a few spins and a bit of time to let the album absorb.
Because I remember after you listened to the preview, we had talked, and you weren't as impressed at that point about it. And I think that with a lot of records, particularly a band like Metallica, it kind of has to sink in a bit. So I thought that was kind of a bizarre strategy, especially only to preview like 4 songs. But what
and they weren't even the final mixes as well. They were rough mixes at the time, which is just weird. I don't know why they did it. I mean, I was obviously really delighted and honoured to get to hear it. But what I thought at the time, Bob, and I think you and I talked about it in detail, was that it was a solid album, but not a great one by any means. And I don't mean to start off this podcast on a kind of negative viewpoint. I think it's a reasonably good album. I think it's fine. I don't think it's great. I don't think it's anything like as good as anything that was on their first 5 albums. But it's so much better than the last few albums that it's incredible. But there's been so much hype about it, so much excitement, so much people saying this is Metallica back to form, and in my opinion, it's not Metallica back on their best form. It's just an okay album. It's fine, I can take it or leave it, play it a few times. That's how I see it, and I welcome you guys having a different opinion to me.
Well, William, or Bill, let's go with you. I actually read some interesting reviews you wrote about the band, or about this album. Bill, why don't you explain your thoughts when first hearing it?
I'm really excited, and I was very cautiously optimistic. I've been with Metallica all the way through. I've liked everything that they've done, even if I haven't loved everything that they've done. But obviously, there's a huge drop-off in quality after the Black Album. And I thought they gave it an honest try with Saint Anger and really fell down on their faces. So I was not expecting good results. One of the first indications that I got of this being a very good album was Joel's published review, which he was kind enough to send me. And I know Joel has been pretty tough on them with the recent stuff, and so for him to have a positive review, that was a good inkling, because the other stuff that I was getting some kind of view of was not good. The single "The Day That Never Comes" I thought was not very good. I mean, it had the stink of load on at least the first part of it. Yeah, it was a great fast second half, but then the other thing that I heard was the live version of Cyanide that was on YouTube, and didn't think that was very good. I've come to like the song on the album quite a lot, but it just sounds very thin in the live version. And similarly with The Day That Never Comes, it's my least favorite song on the album, but placed on the album as the 4th song, the slow song after 3 fast ones, it works much better than it does as a single. That said, I think this is a great comeback album. I really do. It just to the extent that it's a huge surprise. It's dramatic. It's completely unexpected to me that they would make this kind of a comeback. To me, this is the Viagra album. It's hard again. It's balls out and erections up, and I never expected to see that from these guys again.
I like that. Balls out and erections up.
Yeah, come on.
That comes cool, especially coming from a professor. Do you use that term in your classroom?
I'll lapse into the occasional vulgarity, sure. So I'm really pumped about it, and maybe with some time I'll reevaluate. But to me, this is the biggest comeback album in metal history, maybe in rock history. I mean, up there in terms of surprising, with Ozzy coming back with Blizzard of Oz, with Sabbath coming back with Heaven and Hell, and I can't really think of anything else that ranks up there with the surprise. At least for me personally, to see them back with the kind of sound that they have. I mean, James has his sneer back, and Lars has his snare back, and it's back pre-Black as far as I'm concerned.
Right on. Well, Ed, what about you? What's your views on it?
I think I'm sort of in the middle between the two guys. I'm really happy with what Rick Rubin did for them. I really think it's almost like he's the psychiatrist to these rock stars who really do get way beyond their base and they have to reconnect somehow. I don't know what it is he does, but in terms of the comeback, I totally agree. It's a great comeback. I'm of the thought that the record, I really like it to begin with. It hasn't blown me out of the water in terms of from a compositional sense. I think it's exactly the record they had to try to do. I don't know if they quite did it, but I think it was a really noble try. I mean, it's hard for a band to really go back, as they used to say many times, and go back to where they started. And I think this is their attempt. I think that Metallica is so popular and also so, because they're the standard. So many metal fans are there just to knock them down. I don't think they could ever win at this point, but I think this is a great step. I don't know what will happen, and it's too bad we'll probably have to wait 5 years to see what happens next. But I think this is a great comeback for the band to try to discover where they came from, given where they were on Saint Anger and the some kind of monster movie. It's a miracle that they have any recollection, and I think it took that kind of trauma to really bring them back. But yeah, I think the songs are mostly strong. I have a few favorites so far. Nothing that I would equate with the first three records. But you know what? When I got Master of Puppets, I didn't like it right away either. I was coming off Ride the Lightning, and I thought Master of Puppets was a little bit too dense, and I couldn't. Well, hell, I was 15, but it took a moment, and I really don't think this is going to get to that point. But I definitely want to give it the benefit of the doubt for a while and let it sink in, because I think there's a lot there to digest.
All right. Well, I agree. I agree a lot with you, what you said there, Ed. In fact, I agree with points that each of you said. Something you had mentioned, Ed, which I do agree, it was an album that they needed to do. And I think, Bill, you said it was kind of an unexpected record, but I think it was pretty expected. I mean, the band needed to come back strong and get back on track. And to get back on track was to go back to their roots, go back to their earlier records. Whether it's as strong as, say, Master or Ride the Lightning, you could definitely hear that they've went back to that kind of song structure and that style. And I think they did a damn good job, man. I mean, I'm really impressed. I thought the songs are strong, the riffs are strong. Like I said, I think it was a very smart move, if not unexpected. Let's go on to, you had mentioned about the production and Rick Rubin's production. You had actually emailed me something pretty interesting and something that a lot of critics and fans have been talking about. And I noticed this has been the trend in the music industry over the recent years, especially with the MP3 boom and this and that, is not just the production of the album itself, but the whole mastering of the record being louder than it should be. And a lot of labels are doing this just to make, it just pop right out. When you put it in your MP3 player, play it off iTunes, or put your CD in. You had mentioned something interesting coming from a label standpoint, Ed, about the sound quality of the CD.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think this is another example of why Metallica is under such a microscope. I mean, this issue of how records are being mastered today for iPods where, and not necessarily high fidelity like it used to be back in the vinyl days and the early CD days. That's the kind of conversation you and I have had with some of our A&R friends like Monty Connor from Roadrunner and, the real nerds of this business, and the studio nerds. And only Metallica could make this, this issue become, I think, a public issue. But absolutely, I think, there was definitely some articles about the fact that the record is mastered extremely loud. I'm not an audiophile myself, but essentially what it means is that the middle bandwidths are squashed and essentially you've got a lot of highs and lows. And this is a problem I remember reading for the first time about the second to last Rush record, ironically enough, from 2003. First time I was introduced to this, I had noticed that CDs were getting louder and louder as the years went on, and apparently this is the reason. So it's interesting because it's definitely another point of contention about the sound of the record. It's not affecting my enjoyment of it, but again, I'm not digging that deep into it. I don't know if Joel or Bill have noticed or heard about that same dilemma.
I can hear it on the record, but it's unlike you, man. It doesn't trouble me. It's just the way it is. It doesn't detract from my enjoyment.
What about you, Bill?
Yeah, the same here. I mean, I started reading about it, mostly fan reviews on Amazon and that kind of thing, and they were getting into the terminology that I wasn't even familiar with, clipping and this sort of thing, and so I went back and the louder you turn it, the more that you hear it. Really loud volumes. It kind of sounds to me like what used to happen back in the day when I would borrow a buddy's record and I'd make a tape of it, right? And it just was not as clear as the original and the loud.
Yeah, you record it extra hot where it gets into the red and you hear just a little bit of distortion. Yeah.
Sounds like
you know what?
Are blowing up.
Yeah.
And you know what? I almost kind of like it. I mean, as foolish as that might sound to say, because it has that old school kind of sound to it. Think about borrowing somebody's vinyl of Kill 'Em All and taping that and then taping the tape. I mean, that's the way people heard it back then, you know? So, I mean, with this return to the old sound, there's also in some ways a diminished sound quality. And, you know, the album would be better if it were mastered better, I'm sure. But like the other guys, it really doesn't bother me.
Right.
There's actually an online petition signed by a few thousand fans asking Metallica to remaster and reissue.
That's true.
Which I think is crazy myself. But it does show the
anger while they're at it, huh?
I asked, so I interviewed Lars the other day, and I asked him about the rumours that they were going to reissue, remaster Justice with Babes and reissue it. And he said, no, they think about it a lot. You know, it comes up from time to time. And they think about it for like 5 seconds, and then they say, no, we're not going to do it. We did our best shot. And interestingly, they've also thought about doing the same thing with St. Anger, completely re-recording it and reissuing it. But again, they've decided not to do it. But what's more interesting to me is that obviously they do think about these things. You know, obviously the issue of the sound is in their heads, and they consider it. And okay, they reject it, but at least they consider it, which to me is amazing. You know, a band of their stature responding to public pressure like that. So that's an interesting angle that people might not be aware of.
You mentioned a good point.
Lars actually.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Lars actually did come out on the record about the clipping and the sound quality, saying that, you know, the production was something they had pretty much handed over to Rick Rubin, and the record sounds the way the record's going to sound, and they're not going to reissue it. And I don't know, some of the tone of Lars's comments got me worried. Sounded a bit like some of his adamants with the Napster stuff, that kind of thing. I mean, it'd be nice for them to concede it doesn't sound as great as it could, and I'm not sure Rick Rubin is the one who bears the responsibility for the clipping and such. In fact, I guess the mastering was done by a guy named Ted Jensen, and he actually said something online about not being proud to be associated with this one, and then backtracked on that. And
to me, that's amazing, Bill. He came out on the record and said that, and normally Metallica's organization is completely watertight. People don't do that, you know.
Yeah.
Well, he's not really part of Metallica's organization per se, but I know what you're saying.
He's not as tight with the band as you are, Bob.
You almost get the sense that Ted Jensen probably got put under the gun after he came out and did.
This was his first one he did, right? Because they usually used Bob Ludwig or other people on their previous records, didn't they?
This is some guy from Sterling in New York, Ted Jensen.
But, you know, as Ed had said, it's not Metallica wasn't obviously the first to do that, but of course they're always under the microscope and they're going to get the most slack about this. And of course, when it comes to Metallica, it's going to probably be brought up more so than, you know, Rush or any other band per se. But it is kind of a trend, and I think it is something that the label, I don't think it was Rubin's fault or anyone's fault in particular. I think it was probably the label's fault because they need to compete with because obviously now they're up on iTunes and all the other sites. And once you put it onto your iPod, you don't want it to sound any lower than all your competing bands out there. So, of course, they're going to want to, you know, do what everyone else does. And I think the trend actually started with a lot of, not even with the labels, because I noticed a lot of home independent bands that would just press their own CDs would do that. They would just make it unbelievably hot, where it just distorts and it's just ridiculous just to make, you know, their band sound louder than everyone else. But Ed, you did mention that the vinyl version is much better sound. Was it you that mentioned it, Ed, about the vinyl version of this album?
Yeah, you know, I haven't heard it yet, but I think we were talking to Brian Slagle, who had just picked it up, and he was really happy with it. And that should solve the problem there. I mean, exactly, this issue of loudness is inherent to CDs right now in the modern era. You know, vinyl is not something, you know, it's mastered the way it's mastered, and there's no upping the volume past a certain point. So here's a good, you know, a reason for people to go out and buy the vinyl. If I was Lars Ulrich, God knows Lars talks a little too much most of the time, I would start peddling the vinyl because, you know, I'm sure that's going to be the best sound that you're going to get from this record, as you do most any record. And, you know, if file sharing trends, you know, continue going the way they are, I mean, not only are vinyl sales already on the up, I believe last figure I saw is that they're back to 5% of all sales are vinyl again.
Cool.
Yeah, it's crazy. Also, there's a trend now where people are buying this high-quality vinyl that's being reissued, digitizing it direct from the vinyl on the first play. I think they're calling it vinyl drops. Basically, you drop the needle. The first time you play the record, it's as pristine as a piece of vinyl is ever going to sound. That goes to digital, and that's what you hear. That's a trend that's beginning there. Tom Petty recently released his last record with another, I forget the name of the band, his first band.
Was that the Heartbreakers or previous to that?
No, he actually put out a record under a different name. It's a band that was pre-Heartbreakers, but it was released last year, and what he did was he had the vinyl ref that they would use for the vinyl printing put digitally as the digital release. So it's an odd, decision. It's probably like at the moment sounds crazy, but maybe it's the way to go. Maybe we start, taking the vinyl quality and putting that to digital, and except for all the kids who don't care and want the volume, us old fogies will enjoy it. So
as far as the overall production, what's your view on Rick Rubin? I mean, I think Rick was just for namesake. I think they could have done just as good a job with their old producer engineer Flemming Rasmussen.
I gotta disagree with you on that, Bob. I mean, I can hear parts of the album where it sounds like the sound of Saint Anger, and I can almost hear where a song is about to go wrong, and it doesn't. And I mean, what Rubin is known for is having a golden ear. He's not an engineer, he's not a musician, but he's able to hear what works. And from everything that I've read, James and Lars and the rest have been willing to defer to him when they came to disagreements about what was going to work, and his whole way of proceeding is just to kind of pick out what works and what doesn't work and steer people in the right direction. And he just seems to be able to do that for an amazing variety of artists, from the Chili Peppers to Johnny Cash to on and on. He's going to be working with you too. It'll be interesting to hear what he does there. So.
Well, I got to give it a few more listens. I mainly only listened to it in my car, and to me it sounded a lot of the production qualities took a lot from like Flemming's work, particularly with Injustice for All, a real dry sound, and a lot of parts I thought it was kind of like the guitar and the bass was kind of meshed together. And it seemed like they tried doing a lot of the ideas from, particularly the Injustice era and some from Masters. And I don't hear any kind of real new sounds. It just kind of seems like they went back to their old roots. And that's why I say I think, Flemming probably could have done, or the band, producing it themselves with them could have probably, done.
But it was Rubin who told them to do that. He had them listening to Master. He had them thinking about and listening to the music.
Yeah, but I could have told them that. You could have told them that.
But they wouldn't have listened to me, Bob. I don't know.
But they would have listened to me, damn it.
That's the key.
Hey, I'm Bob Nalbandian of Headbanger magazine. What the hell are you doing?
That's right. Regarding that, what's your thought about the production there, Joel, and Rick Rubin's work on it?
What I'll say is that I'll back up what William said, which is that Rubin is known for getting the bands into the psychological space that is necessary for them to perform their best. I accept your point that they could also have worked with Flemming Rasmussen and done a good job. And in fact, I kind of wish that they'd just start producing their own albums, actually, and stop relying on these outside people to whip them into shape. But clearly, they've been rejuvenated. I mean, the net result is that they have been rejuvenated. Whatever you think of the album, it's faster, it's heavier, it's got more ideas than the previous 4 albums, right? And I think so much of that is down to Rick, because he sits there, he's this kind of guru, and he tells them where to get their heads. I don't think he really cares, as we said, about the sound and perhaps even some of the arrangements, I don't know, but he gets them psychologically ready, and that's what he clearly has done on this album. So in that sense, he did a good job.
What are your thoughts, Ed?
I agree. I mean, I think it's ultimately down to Rick is able to, he understands these musicians that he's done from Cash to Metallica in terms of where they came from, and he's respected enough that they finally just shut their big mouths and listen and, take some instruction. And, let's not forget that Rick Rubin produced Slayer's Rain and Blood.
Yeah.
This guy has thrash credentials from day one, almost. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting fact that I think that the guitar sound, you're right, maybe they didn't go as dirty as they could have. It's funny, too, that Rick did produce some Trouble records, and I always read that Metallica tried to emulate their guitar sound on Trouble when their early records. So who knows? Maybe it's just another record away from getting that, back to Kill 'Em All. Who knows?
Right.
No, man, I think they're done with this album. No, I do. I'm not kidding you. I think they might do one more, and that's it. It's the same with Slayer. All these guys say, we're in our mid-40s, the physicality of the show is taking its toll. I mean, we all know this, but they really nearly split at the St. Anger era. James refers to it now as Metallica's near-death experience, and Death Magnetic is their Life After Death album, right? And it really seems they came really, really close to doing it. And Lars said just the other day, you guys don't really know how close we came to it. James would have been off playing country music in Nashville. Lars, he would have been off making films. Kirk would have been touring with Joe Satriani. You know, he went through all these things in the feature that I wrote about him. It was actually quite shocking because I'd assumed, you know, we've all seen Some Kind of Monster. I assumed that they just had a few arguments and James went through rehab and then they all hugged and kissed and it was okay. But it appears that it was a really, really close call. The band very, very nearly split. You know, I don't know if I'm a pessimist. You know, you were saying earlier, Bob, that I've been quite hard on Metallica in the past, and I have, although I love them so much. You know, I think they're such an amazing band. No one will ever replace them. But I kind of see an end to their career coming, you know. It's got to be the next 5 years, maybe 10 years. You see these guys doing this in their 50s? I really don't.
Interesting. It could be one of those situations like the Who or whatever, where they come around every, 5 to 10 years, do a reunion record and tour. But, I mean, doing their schedule, what they've done, I mean, especially a band of that caliber with their grueling touring schedule, their tour, 14, 15 months straight. I mean, there's no way, they could continue on doing that, especially, at their age. They're all family guys and,
they don't need
James
to do it.
So
they don't need the money. They don't need the exposure. And look at the songs as well. The Stones are still going, but then they're playing Jumping Jack Flash.
Sure.
How do you go out and play Disposable Heroes and Fight Fire with Fire, which require incredible picking speed and drumming and snare speed? You can't do that when you're 62.
Well, that's something you got into with Tom Araya, too, from Slayer.
Well, yeah, he said the same thing. He said, look, I don't want to think about seeing an old man headbanging on stage, which is interesting, And he's
you wonder where they'll go with stuff too, right? Because I mean, you see this with the hip hop artists that at some point their career is over in music and they become producers, or they go into movies, or they become fashion moguls. There's something unseemly about an old hip hop artist, And the same is kind of true with thrash, I guess.
Exactly. There's nothing worse than a bunch of old guys sitting around talking about thrash metal.
The record's obviously done real well. I think it sold like 500,000 in like the first 2 or 3 days from what I understand.
Yeah.
It was number 1 on Billboard, Amazon, and iTunes. So obviously they're selling records.
I think that's largely because of your support, Bob, that you gave it.
Well, pretty much. I would say about 75% mine. I'll give you about 3 or 4% there, Joel. So I can't take full credit, but the fact is, obviously, with all the stuff that Metallica has gone through regarding, downloading for free and all this, they're selling records. I mean, people are buying this record rather than just downloading it for free. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sold 500,000. I think that's more than any of their records have sold in 2-3 days, huh? Maybe.
I think that might be right. I'm not sure, but I was also surprised at just how quickly it sold. Slipknot just had a number 1 record as well. So maybe it's a good year for metal in general. I mean, when there's a trouble in the economy and in the country, usually that means good sales here in the U.S. So.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I know this is probably, without question, the most anticipated Metallica record.
Yeah.
It obviously made quite an impact.
So I was saying, I think we should, us, like we just joked about, we're a bunch of old guys talking about thrash. I mean, we should give that some credit to, I think, the fans out there that aren't maybe as analytical as we are. I think this is a reflection of a good record. I mean, again, it might not end up being on par with the original 3. I think we still have to give it some time to, at least maybe compete with And Justice for All. You never know. But I think this is a sign that, kids are talking to each other and they're like, no, this is a good record. You should go buy it. Unlike Saint Anger and unlike Reload, which I thought was probably as bad as it got. So
I actually preferred Reload over Load, but pretty much
I
the
like
same.
Load.
Yeah, they have. I reckon there are probably 8 good songs between those albums.
I think they could have put them both into one album and made a great album instead of 2.
Well, a reasonable album.
Or at least a good album, right? Yeah. There's about 8 good songs on there, depending on who you talk to.
Yeah, I go back to, the album. I still think it's spectacular. It's not my favorite kind of Metallica because I'm a fan of the first 3, but I still think it's a great record. But you know what? Load, I thought was a decent continuation along those lines. I personally think the songs from Load, they interest me more from a variety standpoint today, this could change next week, than the Black Album. I only think Reload is the one where I have a real issue because I really do think those are just the leftovers that didn't make Load, and the quality just isn't there. I think Load was, for what it was at the time, wasn't bad.
Well, it's interesting. I think it's the Guitar World magazine where Hetfield admits they had a problem with quality control at a certain point. And I think that's typical of artists at their stage in their careers. The midpoint of Dylan's career in the 80s, he was releasing albums and they'd leave tracks off and they'd find their way onto bootlegs, and they were better tracks than were actually released. And I think when it came to load and reload, they just didn't know what was good and what wasn't good, and they maybe had 8 good songs on those 2 albums, and they could have made one really good one.
Right. Hetfield said recently that when you try and write 40 songs, as he did for those 2 records put together, your focus is just like diffused, and if he'd only written 8 or 10, they would have been good songs, which I think is a reasonable point of view. I mean, the guy had to write and deliver 40 songs. I mean, my God, that's a burden for anybody, Maybe as, when a decade's passed or something and we're all really old guys sitting around in wheelchairs, maybe we'll look a little bit more, benevolently or charitably on those albums, and think, okay, they have their place, it's still better than half the other shit that was coming out in 1996, you've got to think about it like that.
Well, I don't know if that's a record company pressure thing or what. I mean, it was the same thing with the Guns N' Roses, Use Your Illusions. I thought, they're good double albums. It could have been much better as one album. Same with when System of a Down did the Mesmerize and Hypnotize. They could have put it all into one record. There's a lot of throwaway tracks, I think, on all those records, including Load and Reload. And I think maybe it was, financially speaking for the record company, rather than doing a double record, let's kind of separate them and, milk the fans, so to speak.
Yeah, I guess if I'd been 12 years old, 13 years old, and I heard Load for the first time in 1996, I would have thought it was amazing. It's all about perspective as well.
That's an excellent point. It all depends on your point of entry into Metallica. I'm amazed in talking to different people what their favorite album is. And you do find people who Load or even Reload is their favorite album because that was the album that came out new when they were 15, and it's the first album they bought new. Some people even Saint Anger, In my case, Master of Puppets was the first one that I bought like on the day it came out, and like Ed said, that took a little warming up to. It wasn't as good at first as Ride the Lightning. And then when the Justice album came out, I didn't care for that much at all. It sounded, sterile, and the songs were kind of too long and not going anywhere at places. And, it's amazing to me the diversity you find in the fan base about what favorite albums are.
Maybe we should, the Metallica fan base generally, should not really worry about their new albums too much and just go and see them live, because they are still one of the best bands that play live on the planet. You know what I mean? Have you thought about that line, not worrying too much about the albums?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's been a while since I've seen them, but you just recently saw them on this last tour in England, right, Joel?
You know what? It was interesting when you were talking about Justice for All a minute ago, because when they played Blackened with that incredible taped intro, which when it starts, it just gives you chills, When they played that song, I was just reminded of how incredible that whole album is. They're just so amazing live. And James has got his picking hand back, his picking precision back that he had in the 80s, which he didn't really bother with in the 90s. Rob, as we all know, but he's given them such a boost. It's almost like when you walk out of the stadium, having seen them, it's kind of academic what you think of their latest record or what you think of Reload or Load, because they just delivered this show that just crushed you. And so many bands don't do that these days. Sure. Maybe people kind of forget that a little bit when we discuss Metallica.
Definitely.
I think that's a good point of the musician, question. That I think I'll be very curious as to hopefully see this next tour to see how Kirk Hammett performs, because one thing about the new album, which I think everyone can agree on, is that, after Kirk basically was shut out of Saint Anger, told that guitar solos were old news, you shouldn't be doing guitar solos, and forced not to. I think one of the best assessments I read about Death Magnetic was from my colleague over at All Music Guide, Stephen Thomas Irwin. He basically, his first line of his review was that he called Death Magnetic Kirk Hammett's revenge. And I mean, Kirk really is on this, all over this record, and not just playing that damn wah-wah pedal that he seemed to do throughout the 90s, really playing guitar solos. And I wonder if Rick Rubin also forbade him from just, wah-wahing his way through every solo, because this is the first record since And Justice for All where Kirk Hammett, I think, is really playing metallic guitar solos on these songs.
I agree, and what Bob was saying before earlier on about it was expected they try to go back to their roots. I agree with that, but I just thought it was unexpected that they could do it. And Revenge of Kirk Hammett, I mean, to hear him back that way, even if he tried, I didn't think he could do what he did on this album. That's a large part of why I'm blown away by it.
And Joel, you had mentioned that you had recently spoke with Kirk, and he was real nervous about going into the studio to do this.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you read the current issue of Total Guitar magazine, which I think you guys can get over there, the cover feature is this one that I wrote, having interviewed those guys. To my amazement, Kirk confessed to all these areas of his playing that he wishes he could improve on. He thinks his picking hand is really unsophisticated. And as you said, when he was preparing to track the solos on the album, he just kept having these crises of confidence, and his friends were saying that doesn't sound good, and he'd start all over again. And it was just so weird. You would think after all these years that the guy would have some faith in his own abilities, which are huge, as we know. But he appears to be very much a kind of a tortured artist in that sense. He worries if it's good. He worries if a solo comes too quickly because it can't be any good, and he worries if it takes too long because it can't be any good. It's strange, really. You would imagine that these multi-gazillionaires who've sold 1 trillion albums between them would be all confident.
Well,
but
you know
not,
what, though? It just shows how much this band is still just so much under the microscope, and how they still have their integrity. It doesn't matter the fact that they've got all this money, and they could probably get away with putting out a mediocre record and it'll sell and whatnot. But I mean, really not so much with Metallica, because their fans will critique them like no other band. And everything from the aspect of how they're going to market the record, the band, they're nervous about it, they're worried about it. And it's something that, you got to kind of admire. And I think not enough bands are. I think a lot of bands are too comfortable with their career and their financial status that they, just figure, well, it's time to do another record. Let's go in the studio and do it. And, it's amazing how a band like Iron Maiden, I mean, they really are the ultimate heavy metal band when it comes like that. They don't worry about anything, it seems. When you ask Bruce about the whole downloading issue, he's like, people are going to do it anyway. I mean, Iron Maiden's never been a band, at least in America, that have sold a ton of records, but they always deliver live, and they're always going to be one of the biggest live bands. And I think that's the same thing with Metallica.
I think what you're referring to there is a certain British spirit that you don't get in the States.
that could be.
We have a certain depth of character. I think that's what you're trying to say, right?
I think in America, the media, everybody's under the microscope so much. But it seems like a band like Iron Maiden, they don't give a shit. They got this unbelievable confidence about what they do and how they go about stuff. And, they just know they're good. And I think, Metallica may have that confidence, but I think deep down inside, they know that they're under the microscope. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think that feeds into some of the lyrical themes on the new album too. And one of the contending titles for the album was going to be Songs of Suicide and Forgiveness. And there's lots of themes of betrayal on there, from another Unforgiven song to the Judas Kiss, which is one of my favorite songs on the new album. And they're obviously, Hetfield's the guy behind the lyrics, obviously very sensitive to the fans really in some ways turning on them. I mean, it's really ironic in that so many fans felt that Metallica betrayed them at some point, whether it's Black Album or Load or whenever. And, I think they felt like the fans betrayed them too. I mean, it's a really tough thing to negotiate. I'm not sure the fans really owed them all that much, or that they owed the fans anything in particular. But there's a bond there. It's a friendship, almost a family bond, and both sides have not been happy, it seems, for some time, and that's why I kind of think of this in some ways as the story of the prodigal son, where to my mind the prodigal son has finally returned. I didn't expect to see them again in this condition, and I'm just happy as hell about it.
What would Socrates have thought of Death Magnetic, Bill?
Well, that's an interesting question in a sense, because part of what inspires the album is the idea of these kind of people who are drawn to death. Lane Staley is cited as an icon, I think, of a Jim Morrison type person, and Socrates is quite of that mold. He's the guy who, when the jury asked him to propose a penalty, said, well, let me think. It's up to me to propose what I deserve. Give me free meals at the public expense. And we all know his last meal was hemlock, and he took a long dirt nap after that. So he was a guy drawn to death in that very same kind of way, someone standing up for his principles along those lines.
How
so would you have preferred Master of Puppets to Death Magnetic?
How would Socrates have compared the two? Is that what you're asking? I mean, I could go on with those kind of questions. You don't want to get me started.
Show up your professorism. Talk about the philosophical aspect of this album compared to the other records and what they might have been going through in their mind.
Well, like I said, one of the great themes there is betrayal and forgiveness. I mean, that runs through. A lot of people were not happy seeing another Unforgiven, and I wasn't excited when I saw that on the track list, but I think that's lyrically a very strong song about forgiveness and self-forgiveness, and philosophically, the album puts us in league with the existentialist philosophers who ask a lot about death and, what does death have to do with the meaning of life, and how does the fact that we're all going to die free us up in terms of taking responsibility for our own actions. And Hetfield has said that the album is as much about fear as it is about death, because really you have two poles on this magnet. You have the people like Elaine Staley or Jim Morrison who seem drawn to death, morbidly fascinated with it and ineluctably drawn to it, and then we have people who fear it, and that's most of the rest of us who live most of our days pretending as if we're not really ever going to die. And I think both the tempo of the music and a lot of the lyrics clue us in. You and I are going to die, and we may die sooner than we think, and that really should affect the way that we live. I mean, the old Latin chestnut of Carpe Diem, seize the day, seems to me to run throughout the album. And I could go on and on. You don't want me to.
Yeah, it's a learning experience. We love it there, Bill.
What
are you guys' thoughts lyrically on the record, Ed?
I got to be honest with you guys. I haven't delved into the lyrics too much yet. I will say, though, that I was surprised that there's that instrumental on there and that I actually quite liked it. I was surprised. I thought that was, something that could never happen again.
Again, I think it's kind of them going to their old roots. Of course, they did the instrumentals on Ride, Masters, and Justice. So, but very, very strong song. I do agree.
The one thing I would say about the lyrics is that there has been a lot of criticism of The Unforgiven 3 because Hetfield sings about seas of gold. There's that line about seas of gold. And, that is kind of cheesy, actually, but I really like that song. I didn't expect myself to. I really do like the ballad, and I thought the other two Unforgiven sucked. What's my point? I don't know, the Black Album, I just heard it a million times, and you know what I mean.
It was overplayed, obviously, but when it came out, I thought it was a great song.
Not my cup of tea. Anyway, so some of the lyrics are a little bit wacky, but, that's fine. I'm all right with that. They always make you think a little bit. And for further information on this topic, I refer you to Metallica And Philosophy, edited by Bill Irwin.
Definitely. If any Metallica fans want to read a very interesting book, definitely check out the Metallica And Philosophy book. It'll rack your brain a bit like it did mine, but, then again, I'm a simpleton when it comes to that kind of stuff. I'm not a philosopher, and it just lost me in so many places. I've never read a book where authors go so in-depth about the band's lyrical. It's almost not only philosophical views, but almost psychological. Would you agree there, Bill, or is there a vast difference?
Yeah, it's philosophy very broadly construed, so we're looking at psychology and political issues as well, and you guys are very kind for what you say. Just getting back to the lyrics, though, I agree with Joel. I like Unforgiven. That Seas of Gold is a little cheesy, and that's part of why I was scared when the first couple things I heard, like The Day That Never Comes has some really bad lines in there. You have love is a 4-letter word, and then there's sunshine, S-O-N, and cyanide has suicide, I've already died. Those are among some of the worst things I think Hetfield has ever written. But the composition lyrically came out somewhat differently under Rick Rubin's direction. That they talk about this, I think it's in the Rolling Stone interview, where when he was blocked, and so many times in the past, the key to writing lyrics has been Lars making James sit down and watch a movie that Lars happened to like and taking that as inspiration. And Rubin kind of directed him to do these gut spills, as Rubin calls it. In some cases, you get something that's almost Slayer-esque, where you just get like two words that come together, and they just kind of sound cool together, and they don't really mean a whole lot, like karma amputee. That could have been a Slayer lyric as well as a Metallica lyric, And a lot of them don't make a whole lot of sense. They're just kind of strung together, and they sound cool, and they're evocative and provocative. And another thing about the lyrical content is it's just oftentimes not coherent within a song. He'll change narrators of the song, and it just doesn't work. Whereas in a song like Master of Puppets, you get both the demonic sort of master drug or whatever speaking and the victim speaking, and that works. But like Judas Kiss, I love the beginning parts, but then it shifts into a different narrator, and for me it just doesn't work once that happens.
I can't stand that song. It goes on far too long.
A lot of people like that song. I wasn't as crazy about that. I think the strongest song, I love Broken, Beaten, Scarred. Great tune.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good song.
The End That Never Comes.
You hear that live, right?
I haven't yet. Is it on YouTube or available live?
Oh no, what I mean is you can hear that already in your head live with the kind of crowd chanting along, and it's going to be a great live song.
I mean, that riff in that song in Broken, Beaten, Scarred is just amazing. I mean, the band really did come back and write. I think they really put their mind to this record and came up with some real clever riffs.
A lot of the criticism, Bob, has been that there are too many riffs on this album, that the songs kind of meander. There's another riff, two fucking riffs.
But that's how a lot of their past albums were. And it's
an interesting.
The fact that all their songs are long. Again, Metallica have always claimed that they're a band that does what they want. But you got to think about it. I mean, they knew that they had to do on this record primarily what the fans wanted. Not to say that they didn't want to do a record like this, but they knew deep down inside that they needed to rebound from the Saint Anger record, and the only way to do it was to do something that their old classic fans would enjoy. And I think that's the reason why the record shot up to the Billboard charts and iTunes charts and sold 500,000 records in a couple days.
I think with Saint Anger, they finally came back around to realizing that what they want is to be accepted like they were, and I think that was part of the mindset that pushed them in this direction, and which is why I think Joel's got a very good point about the fact that this could be their last record or close to it, both because they're just getting old and they've done it, they've been there, and also because what can they do next might be the next question. But
that's an interesting point, and it is going to be the next question. Ed, I didn't mean to interrupt, but you just mentioned it. What can you expect from Metallica next? And while you're on a roll there, Ed, why don't you give your thoughts about that?
I don't know. I mean, I think the point of thrash being the kind of music that you can't play, you need a certain youth to be able to pull it off. I think that's a very good point that suggests that some of these bands might have to pack it in eventually. But bands just seem to make a way these days, and they never go away. They even if they take 5 years off, they come back and they do the tour and they figure out. So I have a feeling they'll be coming back every 5 years or so, just like every other major band that can just make a quick buck or a slow buck, whatever you want to call it. But in terms of recording, I hope that this is basically, like I said, they finally came back around to Metallica does what they want, and what they wanted was to be accepted again. Maybe if ideally they'll come back next time and continue down this path and maybe write a few shorter songs to go with these long monoliths that they wrote this time and find more of that balance that they had on Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, and Master of Puppets and keep finding their way back. But, they could turn right back around and try to go for an experimental direction again. Really, that's as far as I'll commit myself to guessing.
Well, my point is with a band like Metallica, how experimental can they get? I mean, my thoughts are, they started out as a thrash band, and when you're a thrash band, let's face it, I mean, when you're a metal band, it's tough enough to veer in different directions. But being a thrash band, I mean, Slayer's one band that obviously cannot broaden their music much more than they already have. When you do an album like Rain and Blood, what more can you do thrash-wise, So I see the point with Tom Araya, I mean, how much longer could they play, songs like Jesus Saves and Angel of Death, live?
Yeah, and certainly if you look at Metallica, James has just turned 45. Now, if they take another 5 years over doing an album, which is probable, he'll be 50, man. I mean, is he going to really come and play Disposable Heroes at 50? I'm not saying he can't, but will he want to? And I think what Lars told me the other day about this scenario where he might go off and do country music in Nashville, that seems more...
Lars or James?
Lars said that James might end up doing that.
I got you.
And I think what your earlier question about how could they make it more progressive, I think they'll do solo albums and that's what will happen. Yeah, I think that's what we can expect. I'm sure they'll always carry on making music because they are master musicians, but as a unit, nah.
As a unit, I don't really think they could get much more experimental. I think with the Black Album, Bob Rock pulled out everything he could in the band, and the Black Album and the Load records that followed, but I thought the Load records kind of followed the same kind of formula as the Black record. But I thought the Black Album was brilliant in the sense that they realized they had to do something different. They just couldn't put out another Masters of Puppets or Injustice for All. Everything was pulled out of them as far as experimenting and broadening their sound, but still being heavy. I mean, you listen to some songs on that record, there's still some of the heaviest Metallica songs. And then, of course, they do the S&M record where they, get together with Michael Kamen Orchestra. But as much as Lars would like to be a band like a U2 or a Zeppelin, let's face it, I don't think they've got it in them. I think musically, James is a phenomenal vocalist, but he's not an experimental vocalist. He can't do much with his vocals. Kurt, I think on this album, whether it be Rick Rubin or the band, I agree. I think they pulled as much out of Kirk Hammett as he could possibly do, and I'm not downplaying him at all, but he's somewhat limited. A lot of his leads do sound the same. And I go back to, a band like Megadeth, and, people will argue with me about this, but I really think they're the only thrash band that are capable of broadening their sound, particularly when Marty Friedman was in the band. I thought some of those Megadeth records were brilliant, where they could really expand apart from the typical metal or thrash metal sound. Where do you think Metallica could go? Let's start with you, Ed.
Well, I honestly think they did get a little more out there with, I think Load was probably the one they went furthest. I think there's that song that Mama Said was basically a country song that James finally fulfilled his, he's been a fan of country music and Skinner and everything since the 80s. So I think, I think the time of experimenting as Metallica is probably through. I think they've seen that it's not worth it, and they can just, get a lot less flack from their fans for being the Metallica that their fans want them to be. But, I don't think they're going to get more experimental. That's one thing that I don't think they'll do, and I think Joe has a good point where they just might pack it in and say, we can't win one way or the other. So, we've done it. We made our comeback. We showed them that we could kind of go back to where we started with Death Magnetic, so that's it. See ya.
I think they could easily be like an AC/DC, where AC/DC sticks to a formulated sound, and we've had this discussion just a couple days ago, Ed. They've done certain albums that are a little bit different or whatever, but they all come back to the formula sound, and that's what they could do. And they realized, you had mentioned that I guess they had one song that they actually had keyboards, which they ditched, because I think fans would have crucified them, an AC/DC song with keyboards. That's a band that can't do, Brian Johnson, obviously he's got a great voice, but a very limited voice. And I think same with the whole band. You can't hear an AC/DC song with synthesizers. You can't hear an AC/DC ballad, so to speak. They have a formulated style. And I think, if Metallica are going to stay within Metallica with that, the same lineup, they got to realize that too. And it's not dissing the band in any way, but what are your thoughts on that, Joel and Bill?
Well, one thing that history has proven is that Rick Rubin is good only once, so I don't think he'll be back for the next album producing, and I don't think he necessarily would do anything to improve. One of the segments of complaints that you hear about the current album, Death Magnetic, is from younger fans in particular, though some older guys like us too, I guess. That it's just out of touch with the current metal scene, And one thing they could do, which I don't think they will do, and I hope they won't do, is try...
Put out our hip-hop record. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, but I mean...
Well, they already did that thing with Ja Rule a few years ago. That was
but they never released that, did they? It was only on the movie, correct?
Oh, I didn't know that. It was awful either way.
They could try to make something that sounded more like death metal, black metal, that sort of thing, but I hope they won't.
They won't.
Testament made that mistake. I don't mean to cut you off there, Bill. Yeah. We'll get back to what you're saying, but Testament did that thing where Chuck Billy tried doing the black metal voice. Machine Head did that album where they kind of got into the new metal thing. But now you listen to the New Testament, the new Machine Head, the new Exodus. Exodus has always been, the same, but the new Death Angel, they've all put out great records going back to their thrash metal roots. And I wonder if, Metallica kind of took from that.
There's definitely that trend, and I think they definitely took that cue. And to my mind, the only time it ever worked when a veteran band tried to sound like the current scene is when Priest did Painkiller. I like that album a lot, and it had that kind of thrash sound to it. But I don't think Metallica will do anything like that, and I hope they won't. And frankly, I don't care what they do next. I'm just so friggin' giddy that they did this album, and it sounds something like the old stuff, and I never expected to get that again. I'm grateful as hell for it. If there's another album, it'll be 5 years from now, and I'll just be glad for whatever the hell it is, quite frankly. And I think there's a million other people like me who would just be glad to get anything from them, because there's just something about hearing Metallica that you're glad for in almost any form.
What are your thoughts?
See, that's a mature, reasonable attitude which you won't get among many metal fans, I don't think.
Yeah.
There's a degree of maturity there which I admire. It's interesting, Bob, you were talking a little bit earlier about how could Metallica make their sound more experimental, and what you have to remember is that the definition of experimental is completely different these days. You've got bands like Miss Sugar.
Experimental might be the wrong term. I mean, I hate using that term, but I'd just say broadening their sound, I guess.
No. I agree with what's been said already. I hope they stick with what they do, and I think they will. And there's no reason for them to change. People buy Metallica because they sound like Metallica. They have had the odd glitch in their past when they, for example, when they refused to use guitar solos on the last album because that was the sort of fad and the trend at the time. But by and large, they just do what they do, and I hope they always will until the time comes for them to wind it up. I kind of think that at this point what remains to them, and this sounds really patronizing actually and negative, what remains to them is to make a dignified close to their career and go out in a dignified manner, not release a substandard album next time. Go out with a really good one that reminds everybody why we loved them in the first place and, leave a solid legacy behind them. And the other thing you said earlier was that they're not like Led Zeppelin. I would disagree. I think they are the Led Zeppelin of this generation.
What I meant by that is song-wise experimenting. Take a Zeppelin album. I love to use the example of Physical Graffiti because not only is it one of my favorite records, but here you got a double album with every single song on that record completely different. There's no way in hell Metallica could do something like that. That's what I mean by experimental, is the fact that, they could...
Okay, I'm with you.
I mean, let's face it, being a thrash band, and that's what Metallica started out with, whether they hate it or not. But when you have a band like a System of a Down or even a Faith No More, I mean, if Metallica started out like a band like that, it would be kind of expected. They could go any way they want. But being a thrash band, it makes it a lot more difficult, even if they wanted to, or even if they could musically, would their fans accept it?
I think they did experiment. I think that's part of why we're having this discussion. I mean, Metallica had 4 very similar records in the first 4, and then they broadened out. I mean, the Black Album was a huge, experiment compared to the first 4. And then Load took more stylistic chances. There were some Doom songs on there, some of those long ones, Outlaw Torn, for example. And then, Reload was just a waste of time. And then, Saint Anger was a mistake. But, I mean, the bottom line is those first 4 Metallica records had a certain sound, and then I think the band experimented. I think Led Zeppelin is not a good example because Led Zeppelin's Led Zeppelin. Deep Purple didn't experiment as much as Led Zeppelin. Black Sabbath didn't experiment. That was,
you listen to Black Sabbath. You listen to Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, what they've done there. Added keyboards and then go from Sabotage and Technical Ecstasy and even Never Say Die, doing songs like Swingin' the Chain, Air Dance. I mean, some very, very diverse stuff. So Sabbath actually did experiment quite a bit. I think a lot more than Metallica did. I agree. Metallica did experiment. My point is, what more could they do? I'm not here to criticize them or anything. I'm just saying I think they've took their experimentation to the ultimate level. And you're absolutely right, Ed. Every record, the Black Album was a major variation in their sound, but still true to their sound. My question is, where could they go from here?
Yeah, and that's why I think, they've gone there. They had the backlash, and now they'll either continue doing, this kind of what they can in terms of repeating what they did to begin with, and, that'll be that. I mean, I think another thing to keep in mind is, Metallica really struck, thrash was so fresh at the time, and I think that's what a great band does, is they take a new medium that's, relatively, the ideas haven't been explored yet, and they're the ones who are able to tap into those ideas. Granted, Metallica pretty much ripped off Diamond Head and, sped it up, and were talented enough to do something with it. But the bottom line is that's genius. That's, like the Beatles said, the good ones borrow, the great ones steal. Led Zeppelin stole a lot too, and so absolutely. There's something to that. And I think so, I forget where I was going with this, but the bottom line is, Metallica, part of the reason I don't think this new record can sound as fresh as the first 4 is because, it's still a retread of something that was already done really well the first time around, and the ideas have been spent.
I will say there are some thrash bands that definitely advanced their sound and progressed. Absolutely. 2 bands in particular, you listen to Voivod and Hellhammer. What Hellhammer did when Tom Warrior did Celtic Frost was night and day different from the old Hellhammer stuff. And you listen to the old Voivod stuff, how raw and heavy it was into what they progressed into. So there's definitely, room for thrash metal bands that have successfully changed their sound into something that is not only incredible, but still caters to the thrash metal market. What are your thoughts, Bill?
In terms of thrash experimentation, and no, I'm on the same page with you guys for the most part. I mean, I think there was a lot of experimentation in the Load era, and most of it I didn't care for all that much, although some of the stranger stuff I really did like. I liked Mama Said, the country song, and, where they're going to go is probably not experimental, although they've surprised us many times in the past, and maybe they will again, but most likely they've got a template with this album that works, and 5 years from now, when if we're lucky enough to get another album, I bet it'll fit this template.
Joel?
Well, my thoughts are not so much on what will they do next, but who will replace them when they finally split. And I think that's an interesting question because I don't see anybody any band that is coming up that has the feel of the kind of the power and the strength and the longevity that could take their place. I don't know if you guys can think of anyone, the next Metallica. I absolutely cannot, a band that has that level of power,
No, I have no idea. You guys are much more in touch with what's going on these days. I mean, the only current contender Ed mentioned before is maybe someone like Slipknot, but probably not them on the same kind of level.
Well, I think they're kind of coming to the end of it now. I think they've peaked.
Well, I think even Slipknot's broadening their sound a little bit too. I think the fact that when Corey came out and did his what's the name of his side band? Yeah, Stone Sour. It was
come on, Bob. Tell us who's the next Metallica. Come on.
Say what?
Who's the next Metallica?
I mean, I think if any band could do it, I thought it would be a band like System of a Down, not as far as sound-wise, but as far as a band that has not only the musicianship, but the songwriting ability and the integrity to do something.
Yeah.
There aren't a lot of bands, I do agree, especially this day and age, and I don't think it's so much the band's fault. I think it's just the way the music industry is now.
Yeah.
And we've got into this on previous podcasts, and it's really a shame. I don't know in this day of age there ever will be a band like Metallica. Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Culturally, the way it goes, too, is, I mean, when we were growing up, you were pretty much a metal fan or you weren't, I mean, kids these days listen to everything, right? They'll be listening to extreme metal and they'll listen to hip-hop, and you don't have that single-minded devotion to a genre or a band the way that we did when we were growing up, and you were diehard for Slayer or Metallica.
All right, well, there you have it, the great discussion on Metallica's latest CD, Death Magnetic. Want to thank my very fine guests, Joel McIver, William Irwin, and Ed Rivadavia for that incredible conversation. For some strange reason, you might have noticed I faded it out toward the end. For some reason, the interview got cut off. I guess about the last 10 or so minutes of the interview got cut off, so I'll go ahead and give you their contact information. Joel McIver, you could reach him at his website at joelmciver.co.uk. That is JOELMCIVER.co.uk. That is his official website. He's got all his information about all the books that he has written. In fact, he is currently finishing up a new book entitled The 100 Greatest Metal Guitarists. That will be coming out on Onibus Press, the publishing company that put out his latest Slayer book, The Bloody Reign of Slayer, and of course the Metallica book that he did back in 2004, and Justice for All, The Truth About Metallica. Bill Irwin, or William Irwin as he is known throughout the book publishing community, can be contacted at his email address wtirwin@kings.edu. That is WTIRWIN@kings.edu. And once again, you can check out William Irwin's book on Metallica entitled Metallica and Philosophy, A Crash Course in Brain Surgery. That is available through Blackwell Publishing. He actually edited the book, I should note, since he had several authors/philosophers that were involved in the writing of that book. So be sure to check that out. And of course, Ed Rivadavia, you could contact Ed or check out his site at allmusic.com. Not his site per se, but the site he works for. And if you type in his name, you can find out more information and his contact. Definitely check him out at allmusic.com. Thanks again for all you guys supporting the Shockwave Skull Sessions. I do appreciate the support. Please spread the word. Check us out on iTunes. We got both the Shockwaves Hard Radio podcast and the Shockwave Skull Sessions up on iTunes, as well as many other directories. Support us on those sites. Write those reviews if you can. And once again, spread the word. Also, I do want to note that we are on the Classic Metal Show, not on Sunday nights, but it's on Monday afternoons, 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. That would be 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific Time at theclassicmetalshow.com or cmsradio.net. And if you happen to be listening to this podcast through a link, be sure to check out the official website at roadrunnerrecords.com/skull sessions. Many thanks to everyone at Roadrunner Records, particularly Jeremy Rosen for hosting the website. The email address, once again, shockwaveskullsessions@gmail.com. Don't forget about the contest, guys. Go back and listen to our previous episode, episode number 11. check out those 10 metal riffs and email me before November 11th at your shot to win that brand new PV Zodiac DE bass guitar. With that said, I am Bob Nalbandian, your host, signing off. Thanks again for your support. We'll see you next time.